Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions, here to give you my top 5 list of video games from 2023. Just my top 5. I'm guessing that my list might be a bit different from others that you'll find from various outlets and YouTubers and things like that, but hopefully that's what you come to this kind of content for, is to get just something a little bit different than the same usual picks out there, and I think you'll definitely get that here. First up, my honorable mention, which is definitely going to be different than other people's this year, is Baldur's Gate 3. Of course, this is celebrated. This is the #1 game on so many lists for video games in 2023, but not for me. Why is that? I don't think for me, it is the best and truest conversion of the tabletop D&D experience. Far from it, even though that's what, many would say about this. I understand why they would. But for me, that's going to go to like Neverwinter Nights, or if we're including the Pathfinder rule set, then certainly Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, because Baldur's Gate 3 unavoidably is a tactical and cumbersome experience to some degree, even after updates adding some difficulty tweaking options, and that is not what I play Dungeons and Dragons for. I don't want a cumbersome rules-oriented experience or tactical experience. I want a flavorful playing a character experience. I want a dungeon master who is not going to force me to be as bogged down in the rules and just going to let me play my crazy character and throw around spells or whatever I want to do without feeling like, oh, I got to factor in these different rules and all this kind of stuff, and that's the freedom that you have in tabletop RPGs. You can have a game master that's just going to go a little bit lighter on the rules, or a lot lighter on the rules, and that is what makes D&D and so many tabletop RPGs so fantastic. And so you can't really make a true tabletop conversion experience unless you mean a true tabletop rules conversion experience. That, I will give you, Baldur's Gate 3 seems to do very well. But anyway, yeah, for my tastes in a video game RPG, I don't want where I walk during combat to be a necessary choice. I want to deal with rows in combat at most, like many JRPGs, dungeon crawl, stuff like that. But I don't want to watch walking either, like select, okay, move over here. I got to think about, okay, the radius of my spell will go around, will have this much space, so I better walk over here in order to put the spell effect in this space over here. I don't want to think about that. I just, like in the old Final Fantasy games, it's like, listen, I have Fire 3 or I have Nuke, and I just want to fire that sucker off and see it nail my enemies. I don't want to think about where should I walk and how many of the enemies will this get. And I don't want any of those factors in the combat at all. I'll put up with them sometimes if there's other things in the game that I really want, and there are many things in Baldur's Gate 3 that I enjoy for its richness and stuff, but I just really am not usually in the mood for that kind of combat. This Baldur's Gate 3 looks fantastic. The voice acting, I think, is fine, but I can't stand having a narrator thrown in forcibly, and I have to listen to them all the time unless I turn off all voice acting, which is, what I did anyway. I'll probably finish Baldur's Gate 3 someday, but I'm rarely in the mood for the tactical combat that it pretty much forces me to experience. So that's just an honorable mention for Baldur's Gate 3. My number 5 space is kind of taken up by 2 games, the Final Fantasy 16 and the port, which I actually would a little more generously call a very light remaster of Risen. Now, Final Fantasy 16, I would say, has lots of spectacle lacking substance, and Risen is lots of substance, certainly lacking spectacle, So I think they fit well in the number 5 slot together. Final Fantasy 16, for my money, is not an RPG. I would say it's not even an action RPG. What I would describe it as is an action game with some very, very light RPG elements, but even those are very bare. You can watch my review for more detailed thoughts on that. It's an incredible looking world, great looking enemy designs, great music, solid voice acting. I will say that the facial animations are kind of wooden, and there are way too many and too long cutscenes for my taste. I just don't like storytelling that way. Let me interact with the world while you are giving me the story. There's games have been doing that for so long. I don't know why some game creators lean so heavily still on cutscenes. It's just, I mean, I guess some people like that. I certainly do not like sitting through long cutscenes. I really just lost interest in Final Fantasy 16. I thought that I would finish it eventually. Now I'm not at all confident that I ever will. Risen, again, substance, lots of substance, but certainly lacking spectacle. I mean, it's a port basically of an Xbox 360 game, but man, it's for an action RPG. It has really satisfying level grinding and leveraging of the loot and the consumables and the resources and the crafting that you can do. It's got really great branching paths of both skill development and quest resolution, and that feeling of zero to hero, surviving at the very beginning just to build up your strength and become more capable and take down the enemies that, you know, once you had a lot of trouble with. That feeling is really strong in the opening hours of this game. But I haven't finished it. I haven't gotten further than maybe 5 hours in or something like that. It's the menu navigation is very awkward and unintuitive to me. The quality of life elements are sorely lacking in Risen. It does have a tone of visual design that is serious, which is what I like, but it's also really unavoidably dated. The voice acting, I think, is pretty strong, but the character and facial animations are very wooden and sometimes virtually absent. Again, I would describe it as a very light remaster, even though the publishers said that it's just a port. It's just a port. And I think that was wise of them to undersell what it is. But I think that it's a little bit more than a port. It's got some light remaster elements of the visuals. I am more likely to come back to this game more likely than Final Fantasy 16. But I think I'm just as likely to always have something else that I would rather play. So some neat things going on in both Final Fantasy 16 and Risen, but I'm not confident I'll come back to either one of them. We'll see. My number 4 is Labyrinth of Galeria, the Moon Society. Now this, if you're wondering what I want in RPG combat, especially turn-based combat, this is what I want. It's grid-based, turn-based, party-based, just the dungeon crawler. I'm not walking around town talking to NPCs and stuff like that and figuring out what do I need to do, who do I need to talk to trigger the availability of the next quest. No, you go to the dungeon, you kill the baddies, you clear the whole dungeon, you rinse and repeat. And there's some things beyond that you might need to figure out, but I mean, for the most part, that's what you do. It's got the same snappy, speed of my brain turn-based combat with short, punchy animations. So in other words, if it's an easy fight, it's going to react quickly to my choices, my button presses. The animations are nice and snappy, so we get through that really fast. But if it's a tougher fight, then it's not forcing me with real-time combat of any kind to make quick decisions. I can stop and think, and once I've figured out what I want to do, I press go. And I think that is superior to either a real-time forced, speed of combat, like many of the Final Fantasy games went to, or, something that's, because in those kind of real-time games, you're either impatient or feeling pressed. And with this kind of turn-based, it goes right at the speed I want it to. It brings a ton of quality of life that I wanted in its predecessor, Labyrinth of Galeria, Labyrinth of Refrain, Covenant of Dusk. It's got deep, meaty systems that I can choose to ignore on easy world settings or sink my teeth into really on more difficult world settings. I like most of the whimsically creepy monster designs and music. I tolerate the chibi attack animations where you see your characters looking like cutesy little anime things. Serious attack animations and more serious visuals and music would move this potentially way up the list. Those are shortcomings for my tastes. Mechanically, Labyrinth of Galeria is wonderful. I want to finish Labyrinth of Refrain first, so I haven't put a ton of time into Galeria, but I know that I have a really special game here waiting for me when I'm ready to play it. Monster Hunter Rise is my number 3. I loved Monster Hunter World, put over 1,000 hours into it, and Rise is less cumbersome in its action controls and in the responsiveness of controls. So movement, action in general is just, I feel more in control of my character than in World. Not a ton, but enough that I notice it. It's also less difficult, but there's also, as a result, less incentive to leverage the systems of the game. And I think that's fine, though, for me for the most part, because the environments, this being originally a Nintendo Switch game, are less dense and interesting to look at and to interact with. But at the same time, that's also not fine, because the environmental and systemic immersion was a big seller for me in Monster Hunter World. You know, in Rise, I fought monsters, but didn't feel near as much like a hunter, where I was like really planning in between hunts which monsters I was going to hunt and coming up with these whole branching paths, these chains of hunts in my mind that I would need to do in a certain order to get the components I would need. I mean, I really was like almost playing chess in my brain, figuring some of that stuff out in Monster Hunter World, and that just is not necessary in Rise. I also really disliked the occasional required tower defense missions. They're called rampage missions, but they basically feel like tower defense in a lot of ways. This is just a different type of gameplay. I just didn't want that. And that, when I realized, oh crap, I have to do a rampage mission before I can continue the main quest line, that would keep me away from Rise for weeks, or I think maybe in some cases even months over 2023. Yet over the course of the year, I put around 100 hours. So I definitely really enjoyed it, but it never truly got its hooks into me. My number 2 is Starfield. Okay, this was not what I want and expect from Bethesda. I don't fall into the really negative rhetoric that I hear online, but neither do I fall into the really super positive. I feel like when I'm hearing either of those ends of the spectrum, I kind of feel like defending the opposite view, because I really do fall somewhere in the middle with this kind of nuanced view of things. It has fewer immersive systems for world interaction compared to, you know, the Fallout and Elder Scrolls games. And it's hard to see the benefits in interacting with the systems for world interaction that they do have, like crafting and stuff. Weight encumbrance, combined with lack of knowing what exactly these ingredients I'm picking up can do for me, really took the fun and incentive out of collecting and picking things up. Repetitious location layouts gave me deja vu and made me wonder if I'd already been to places before. Having said that, though, I still really enjoyed Starfield for what it was. A great-looking, easy sci-fi space shooter with some cool quest resolution choices, weird and creepy alien designs, a grounded but still spectacular feeling sci-fi world that I enjoyed moving around in, and a story that kept me curious until the end. Admittedly, it did not have a lot of intense competition for my time in 2023. But that's my number 2, Starfield. And my number 1, Spider-Man 2. I mean, this really was oh, what the crap! Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak breaking in at the last moment here, taking the number 1 spot, shoving Spider-Man 2 into the number 2 slot. How in the world did this happen? Suddenly my order has changed. That puts Starfield at number 3, Spider-Man 2 at number 2, and Monster Hunter Rise with Sunbreak at number 1. Okay, I'll explain that in a moment. First, let's say a few words about Spider-Man 2. In short, Spider-Man 2, everything I loved about Spider-Man and Miles Morales, including the difficulty options and the awesome slow-motion Zack Snyder Matrix mode that you can kind of create for yourself by using some of the difficulty and accessibility options available. You can really make it into a different style of game altogether, almost a real-time tactical action game. I mean, it's really, and just jump in and out of that flavor of gameplay anytime you want. So you can make the experience, well, I can anyway, I can make this experience what I want. There's story and characters that I care about, which is so rare for me in any video game ever. So I basically mainlined Spider-Man 2 until I finished it over the course of a couple weeks. That's really unusual for me to only play one game from beginning to end until I'm done with it. But it really just pulled me in, both with its story and characters and with its gameplay and the additions, the additional options they added. I just loved Spider-Man 2, had a great time with it. In another year, it would easily be my number 1. But Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak changed the game. It came out, I don't know, in like the spring of 2023, something like that, and I got around to it very late in the year. But before that, I'd put 100 hours into the base game of Monster Hunter Rise over the course of 2023. Mid-December until now, I've put in about 80 hours. So almost the same amount again in a far shorter period of time. That should say a lot about how much this game has sucked me in. The Rampage, what do you call it? Tower defense missions, whatever, those are gone. The difficulty does increase a bit, and it requires a little more systemic engagement, but not too much. Which is both, I guess, a good and a bad thing, given that the visuals and the zones, they still look like an up-resed Nintendo Switch game. But you have AI followers now that really fight well, and it means that monsters are not just on my butt as much as the only one hunting them. And I also don't need PlayStation Plus or randos, to help me out with especially difficult fights. I can have the followers in on even those main story quests at this point. There are new monsters and updated behaviors for old ones. From a pure gameplay standpoint, which is by far what I care about these days more than other elements in games. Well, maybe not by far. Sometimes the aesthetics of a world can really, really suck me in. But from a pure gameplay standpoint, Monster Hunter Rise with Sunbreak is so rich, and there is so much game there to play that takes mind-bogglingly long for it to get old for me. And I don't understand exactly why that is, but wow, what a surprise it was at the end of the year to discover that actually Monster Hunter Rise with Sunbreak is my number one game of 2023. Now for my most thought-provoking game, that goes to Starfield. It doesn't take the opportunity to explore religious themes like I thought it would. It has some pieces in place. I think I've heard speculation that a DLC might really dip into that some more, but it didn't in the base game. But it has some really noteworthy exploration of AI in at least one side quest where you encounter the AI Juno. And I won't say much more than that. I made a video entirely about this side mission titled Starfield's AI Juno, What Could Make AI a Person? And I included the audio from that in the special AI-themed episode of the Christian Geek Central podcast that I put out not long ago, number 791 of the Christian Geek Central podcast, exploring AI in fiction, which explores AI in content I've reviewed over the past 5 to 10 years. So you can check either of those things out for more of my thoughts on that topic. But yeah, that's my list of top 5 games in 2023. What were your top 5 games of the year, or what was your number one? Did any video game in 2023 bring up some worthwhile topics for you to think about? I'd love, as always, to get your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.